Welcome to Armor of Truth, live number 399. We've almost done 400 of these, Summer. That's crazy.
That's quite a few.
But we've done, James, we've done probably 600 videos.
Yeah.
And that other 200 have been, kicked out.
Into the ether.
Rejected. Which is what we're here to talk about today, was let's reject their PrEP Act. Once again, we have the venerable James Roguski with us today. And let me just set up for the folks, and then we want to get James' insight here. The PrEP Act, let me show you on basically the text here. The Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act. Now, this thing was enacted in December of 2005. They claimed that the scope and purpose of the PrEP Act. Now you need to put your context here. Put your mind in the arena of medical oppression, protecting your colleagues, protecting your co-conspirators from ever having to be held to account for possibly injuring the public or something like that. That's basically what we're coming out of here. But their objective, their claimed objective anyway, is to encourage rapid development and deployment of medical countermeasures. Those would be jabs and treatments and diagnostics and antidotes, and shielding manufacturers, distributors, healthcare providers, and program planners from liability whenever an emergency is declared, or a public health emergency. The rationale for this was to prevent legal risk from discouraging pharmaceutical companies, corporations from producing or distributing crucial, treatments, diagnostics, antidotes, jabs during a crisis, such as pandemics, epidemics, or bioterrorism events. Now, of course, James, as we know, this is like the mafia. I mean, is that kind of fair? This is how, there was this saying, I remember, we don't really see the mafia at work anymore, not like it used to be. And that's because they all figured out that government is where you can run the best scam, because you can just bend the law to your favor. And James also has for us here something that you can do to try to save your country. And that is to sign this petition. And James, this is at repealtheprepact.org, correct?
That's correct. All the information is on repealtheprepact.com, and it's very easy just to sign a petition, repealtheprepact.org.
Right. So it's .com and .org. Org will take you to sign the petition. And look, this is what you can do. We hear so many people talking about how they're taking our freedoms, and we got to do something. We got to stand up. Well, here you go. That's just what James Roguski has been doing for all of us for several years at this point, is making it very easy for us to do those things which defend our liberty, and particularly at the local level. So, James, please go ahead and set us up here, and with the PrEP Act, and why this is important, and what message are you trying to get out about this?
Well, thanks again for having me. I really do appreciate it. We could talk for days about this. We've agreed to try to keep this to maybe half an hour. God help us do that, because there's so much to talk about.
Everybody pray for that.
Yeah, really. So, as you said, the PrEP Act was put into law back on December 30th of 2005. And as a very simple starting point, I'm going to pull a number out of the clear blue sky and say that 99.99999% of Americans have never read the PrEP Act. So as a starting point, I firmly believe that the step number one is awareness. Now, what you have on the screen right there, that's HR 4388, is this past week, my efforts to manifest this into reality have come true. Representative Thomas Massie has submitted this legislation into the current Congress to, you can see in the highlighted things, there's a couple of sections of the law that essentially make up the PrEP Act. And this law would need to be passed by Congress, and it would effectively repeal the law, the PrEP Act, that was enacted back in 2005. So this is not something that RFK Jr. can do. It's not like we call out him and say, hey, we need you to do this for us. No, President Trump cannot make this happen. He would be required to sign it into law after Congress passes it. But step number one, and let's just have a conversation, Brad, and we'll go from there. Step number one is that we, the people, have to demand whatever it is that we want. If you're not happy that your legislators, your congressmen in the House, representatives in the House or senators in the Senate are not listening to your wishes, or not representing your wishes and doing what you want, you have to look in the mirror and go, well, have I made my wishes clear? Well, I put it out there into the universe a couple of months ago and have been saying for quite some time, what we need to do is something that in this particular instance, only Congress can do. Only Congress can repeal an act of Congress. Now, most of the folks in Congress right now, some of them maybe, but most of them were not there in 2005. They did not participate in the sham. We'll talk about how it was entered into law. So they have an opportunity to fix and to right a wrong that was shoved through into law, 20 years ago. It's been 20 years. And so ask yourself, 20 years ago, a law was passed. Did you get the memo? Did you read it? Do you know what it means? Okay. Now, I don't remember exactly when it was that I first read the PrEP Act, but I remember how it felt when I got to the section that said, this is one of the many things that is wrong with this law. It says that no court in the land, no federal court, no state court, shall have subject matter jurisdiction over any declarations made by the Secretary of Health and Human Services in regards to the PrEP Act. And my jaw hit the floor. And like, that's legalized tyranny.
That's exactly what they were doing in Germany, legalizing all the things that they were going to be doing years down the line to build up the Nazi regime. Am I right?
Absolutely correct. And so when you corrupt the law 20 years in advance of utilizing that corrupt law, and essentially what it says is that, and this is where it's mind-boggling for people, okay? And it says that the Secretary of Health and Human Services, just because he wants to, now it doesn't use those words, but this is what those words mean, doesn't need any data, doesn't need any clinical trials, doesn't need any studies, doesn't need any evidence, doesn't need anything. Just because he says so, he can declare, not that there's an emergency, he can declare that maybe at some point in the future, I don't know, there might be a problem. And in order to prepare for that problem, he can say which products, pharmaceutical products only, not herbs and vitamins and minerals and all that stuff, that's not named in the law. He can choose whatever kind of vaccines or genetic manipulating injections or anything under the sun, so long as the medical establishment, the manufacturers, pharmaceutical manufacturers, the distributors, the pharmacies, the pharmacists, the pharmacy techs, the doctors, the clinics, the urgent cares, the pop-up clinics, the nurses, and everybody else, as long as they do what he says and uses what he says to use, you cannot sue them for any harms that those treatments or administered countermeasures may cause. Well, hold on just a moment. That takes away any incentive whatsoever for those companies to make sure that their products are safe and effective. And wait a whole nother minute. If those products are safe and effective, then why do they need protection from the harm that those products might cause? Well, this is essentially where safe and effective got thrown out the window, right? There is no testing. They don't have to be FDA approved or even emergency use authorized. The reason for that, we'll go back a little bit to the history of how this came to be.
Okay.
Put yourself in your own personal time machine and go back to 9/11. Then go a little bit forward from there. Shortly thereafter were all these anthrax attacks. Then go forward to the Iraqi war and Colin Powell holding up some vial saying, oh, they've got weapons of mass destruction, biological, weapons or whatever it may have been that they were claiming.
Yeah.
Then go to 2005 and Hurricane Katrina. Well, the Bush administration made an absolute mess of dealing with Hurricane Katrina. So Congress was putting through legislation to combine funding for the military, appropriations for the war in Iraq. They tagged onto that appropriations for Katrina relief for the people who were devastated during the hurricane. And so the House had a bill and the Senate had a bill, and it was a week before Christmas in 2005.
That's how they like to do it.
Not a creature was stirring, not even, whatever. And so they had a review committee, and they ironed out the differences between the two bills. They went late into the night, they went to bed thinking that they had an agreement. They woke up the next morning, and there's this turd in the punch bowl. The PrEP Act was added on to this appropriations bill. And at that moment in time, interestingly enough, a number of Democrats spoke up, because you got to realize the Republicans were in control at the time.
Mhm.
And they said, hey, wait a minute. We had an agreement on defense appropriations and Katrina relief. Where'd this turd come from in the punch bowl? Who added on the PrEP Act? Okay. They very quickly got a constitutional expert to put out a report. They put this into the public record. And I'll name 4 names. The late Representative John Conyers, I believe he was from Michigan, spoke eloquently about, this is what the heck is going on here. We didn't agree to this, and it's unconstitutional. The late Senator Edward Kennedy, it's part of the video that I have on the top of repealtheprepact.com. You can see his impassioned speech saying, this is wrong on so many levels. But you also had Senator Joe Biden and Senator Hillary Clinton speak up on how this was, not only not agreed upon, they snuck it in at the last minute without proper Senate protocols, but that it was in violation of the Constitution. Well, they tried to get it out of the agreement, but that didn't happen. So they all voted for the bill, because that's how our system works. You take must pass legislation and you stick whatever poison pill you can sneak in. And they go, oh, well, if we don't vote for Katrina relief, we're going to get destroyed, in public opinion. And they know that nobody's going to read the tail end that got added on, which is the PrEP Act. So a month and a half after that, Senator Ted Kennedy submitted a piece of legislation to repeal the PrEP Act and replace it with the piece of legislation that he was working on. They had been having bipartisan negotiations to try to set up something like this. He then submitted a very slight variation of that in September of 2006. And in that, it becomes perfectly clear what the original intent was and how it got manipulated and totally messed up. The original intent was, if our military personnel and healthcare people, to trail along behind them, were called into action because there was some kind of biological weapon, either in Iraq, overseas, or in the United States or whatever, that the government would be prepared with some kind of antidote or treatment or vaccine. If they knew what the problem was, they would want to rush to make something to protect personnel, so that if they were sending government employees, military, health personnel, whatever, into harm's way to try to deal with this emergency, that the companies would not worry about being sued for making something in a hurry and providing it for those limited personnel. It wasn't supposed to be, let's jab the world and let the pharmaceutical industry be off the hook. Okay. But it got mutated, and the language got put in a way that it just gave them complete and total protection pretty much forever, just because the Secretary of Health and Human Services says so. It took all state law and just preempted it. So anybody who's got one of these floating around, if you got your little pocket constitution and you go to the 9th and 10th Amendment, you go, hey, wait a
Actually
minute.
do. Look at that.
There you go. Okay. Well, I'm gonna trump you. Okay. I got 2 copies. Right?
Oh,
anyways,
okay.
I win.
Well, I got,
Anyways,
look what I got.
it
This.
doesn't do any good.
I
There
got
you go.
those side by side. There we go.
Okay. You win. You win. It doesn't do any good if you don't read it. Okay. And it doesn't do any good if you
Right.
don't understand it and stand up for it. So
Exactly.
the PrEP Act violates the First Amendment, your right to petition the government for redress of grievances. It violates the Fifth Amendment of due process, the Seventh Amendment of the right to a trial by jury, because what it says is, well, you know, if you got hurt, sorry, you
Yeah.
can't sue. Okay. If there's any laws in the state, forget about it. It's all under federal jurisdiction. And they put in place, really, it should have been called the cockamamie injury compensation program, but it's the countermeasures insurance, countermeasure injury compensation program. Last time I checked, there might be a new one out for July. I haven't checked recently, but as of June 1st, through all of COVID, only 39 people have received any kind of compensation for the harms that were caused, not just by the jabs. This is not just a vaccine issue. It's anything. It's the fraudulent PCR swabs that have harmed many people. It's things like the ventilators and remdesivir and Paxlovid and molnupiravir and all of the hospital protocols and the abuse that people went through, in treatment. Oh, there's nothing you can do until you're blue in the face and you got to go to the hospital. And whether you wanted it or not, they were incentivized in a multitude of ways. Number one, just to be clear, the money that incentivized hospital protocols was from a different act. That was the CARES Act. So I'm not talking about the monetary incentives. They were incentivized to keep giving people a COVID test until they got a positive, because then with a COVID diagnosis, whatever they did, they were off the hook. They would get more money through the CARES Act. That's a separate issue. But once they said, oh, this is COVID, well, there's a PrEP Act declaration for COVID that there's covered people or covered persons and covered countermeasures. As long as we do what the Secretary of Health and Human Services tells us to do, they can't be sued. And so that was one of many incentives and driving forces. If any doctor or hospital or pharmacist or whatever stepped outside of that and said, well, those things are kind of dangerous and maybe not appropriate, and we're going to recommend that you do this, that, and the other thing, they weren't told they couldn't do that necessarily by law, but their administrators, the CEO or whatever, chief operations officer at a hospital or something, no, you cannot do that because we could be sued for using things that work, but you can't be sued for using things that harm. And so to summarize this, repealing the PrEP Act would make it so that if a person is harmed by any action, that is done by not just pharmaceutical manufacturer, but pharmacies and distribution, and they even protect the media from lying to you. I mean, any promotion of all this stuff, you can't sue anybody. The issue at hand, I'm sure you've heard of MAGA, right? Make America Great Again.
Somewhere.
I'm sure you've heard of MAHA.
Yeah.
Make America Healthy Again. Well, what I'm talking about is MACA. And so that stands for Make Murder a Crime Again by repealing the PrEP Act. Now, it's not about t-shirts. I did that for fun. The issue is if the entire medical system knows that the PrEP Act has their back and they can do whatever the government tells them to do, get a lot of money from a different piece of legislation, and have no risk of being sued for the harms that they cause. I'll give credit to Aaron Siri. And I'm going to expand on it a little bit, but he did an interview with Tucker Carlson, and he went to Tucker and he said, hey, let me talk to you about a business opportunity. Okay. we've got these poisonous substances that, you know, we want to inject into people and be able to convince them that this is good for them. And we know that sounds kind of crazy, but the government's in on the deal. And so they've already passed legislation 2 decades ago that gives us protection from legal liability if these poisons cause any harm. But wait a minute, you know, the government is actually going to buy these products from us and distribute them for free, so we get to make the profit. And if anyone has any problem, there's no downside. We can't get sued, so we're not going to lose. And the government is also going to put billions of dollars into the media promotion. You know, the government's going to promote it. They're going to get the media to promote it, and they're going to stifle anybody who says that these problems are harmful. You know, we think this is a great business opportunity. Do you want in on the deal? Well, look at how many people are in on the deal. So I don't know how many, probably millions of Americans are going to oppose the repeal of the PrEP Act because it protects them. Think about the doctors and the nurses and all of the interns and assistants and pharmacy techs and, you know, whomever, who just indiscriminately didn't do any thinking. They just did what they were told, and they inflicted, you know, I think, a biological weapon in very clear there was no benefit from certainly the jabs. Remdesivir and the ventilators just absolutely killed hundreds of, certainly hundreds, thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people, however many. The percentage was like in the 90% range of people dying when those things were applied. They're protected. Now, they didn't necessarily do those things with the conscious awareness that, you know, oh, I don't care if you get harmed, I'm going to murder you. Okay, so maybe it's not murder, maybe it's manslaughter. But the hospital administrators very clearly know that this law protects them. And so if you've ever had a bad experience in a hospital or with family members who, you know, you wonder why these things are being pushed upon the public as the treatment for an ailment, realize that the PrEP Act does not only apply to vaccines. It does not only apply to COVID. There are currently 9 declared issues, and it's listed all on repealtheprepact.com. Things like, you know, botulinum, things like acute radiation sickness, things like, you know, anthrax, but also flu and Marburg and Ebola and all that sort of stuff. If you find that maybe somebody went on vacation to South America or the Caribbean or something, and they got bit by a mosquito and they had some problems, and they come back and their doctor says, oh, you've got Zika. Okay, well, Zika is one of the ones that's got a PrEP Act declaration. Even something like Tamiflu, which is a horrible, horrible drug. We could do a whole show on Tamiflu. Maybe we should do that someday.
Sure.
If you've got some kind of respiratory problem and the doctor says, oh, here's some Tamiflu, and you run into all of the problems that it causes, sorry, you can't sue them for the problems because that's a covered countermeasure being applied by a covered person, can't be sued. Same thing with 6-month-old babies. If they get a COVID vaccine, whether it's the emergency use authorized one or the most recently, you know, by Pfizer, or the most recently totally approved Moderna Spikevax, it doesn't matter. If you think you're going to a pediatrician who's doing a well baby check, right, to inject your child with a quote unquote COVID vaccine, realize that that's not what's really happening. That well baby check is a marketing prepared schedule to fund the business of the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex. And your pediatrician under the PrEP Act is actually a covered person administering a covered countermeasure in a biological warfare scenario that if something happens, sorry, they claim that it's emergency and, you know, they got to rush it in. If any harm comes to your infant child, you can't sue for the harms that it caused. Now, not that suing anybody ever, you know, brings back the health or the life of the person who's been harmed, but to give away that kind of legal or lawful or legislative immunity feeds the idea that they can get away with anything.
Okay, that's the point. I wanted to try to see if I could summarize. So basically, really what it has done is that it has incentivized recklessness.
Oh, you nailed it.
On one hand, and then on the other, it has suppressed the people's ability to seek remedy for something that was in some way that they were injured.
In the same manner,
and both of those things, that really, this is if you look in Webster's, I think maybe you find the PrEP Act under the heading for tyranny. I mean, this couldn't be any more straightforward, right?
Tyranny, corruption is probably find under a whole bunch of words. If to use a different scenario, okay. Now I know you and some honorable people. These are not things that you would do. But you also recognize that if you were making false claims about someone's character, you were saying that this, person, did these, heinous acts and they're a bad person and so forth, that you could be sued for defamation of character, whether it's libel or slander or whatever the right, legal term might be. And so on some level, the law is in alignment with, you can't be lying about people. Now, if you're just representing facts and they did those things, you got nothing to worry about. But you're aware that you wouldn't be doing something like that because you could be sued. It kind of would a little bit. I mean, you're a moral guy, you're not going to do that, but it would keep anybody in check. If a manufacturer, like an automobile manufacturer, makes a faulty seatbelt or airbag or something like that, and they get reports that, somebody noticed that there's a problem, whatever it may be, they voluntarily recall all of that, fix the problem. Yeah, it's going to cost them millions of dollars to fix the problem, but it might put them out of business if they got sued for thousands of problems that didn't get prevented. Okay, so argue about how bad it is if you want, but lawsuits that are in result of harms that are caused keep industry in line. Well, what incentive do pharmaceutical companies have to make sure that their products truly are safe, let alone effective, but safe, when they can't be sued? So if using Aaron Series, business opportunity scenario, if you're a non-ethical person, investor, business person, whatever, and you're looking at investing in an industry that has a guaranteed income from the government buying your product, and you can't be sued if it causes any harm, what incentive do you have to make sure that your products don't cause harm? Because if those products cause harm, that's actually a wonderful customer acquisition tool. Now, I've been saying this for decades, that the tests and the drugs and the jabs are not for your health. They do not heal people. They help convince healthy people that they need to become customers. Oh, if you believe a test, like, you measure your blood pressure or cholesterol or sugar, or go get a mammogram or a colonoscopy or some other, screening technique. Are you really ill, or is that just a scare tactic to get you to voluntarily say, oh, well, let me swallow your poison to lower that number on a test rather than actually adjust your life so that the problem resolves itself naturally? Or maybe there's some boogeyman, pathogen out there in the world that you should be very, very, very afraid of. So let us inject you with some poison that'll make your immune system respond to it, which, when you really understand that that isn't really how it works, that's just a trick to get you to poison yourself in a manner that makes your immune system malfunction. And there are thousands of ailments that you can then be diagnosed with. That's a really high quality, effective business model to acquire new customers. Yes. And if you can put out a product that damages people's health to acquire new customers who a year later come back and go, oh, person's got myocarditis or had a blood clot or cancer or immune dysfunction or whatever the heck it may be, you can't sue them for causing the problem. Okay. When government is working hand in hand with corporations, go talk to Benito Mussolini, that's fascism. And it's a corrupt, business venture that 20 years ago, the pharmaceutical lobby snuck this piece of legislation in on the tail of defense appropriations and Katrina relief. And right now, we, the people, have the opportunity to become aware. Don't take my word for it. I've made it easy. You could read the document yourself. It violates the Constitution in at least 8 different ways. And we have the opportunity, thanks to Thomas Massie, to push legislation to take that off the books. Now, if we can't work within our government system of, hey, there's a law on the books that violates our rights in so many different ways. Thanks for going down through the list. The system in place is that if we want to repeal a previously enacted law, we have to enact another law that simply repeals it. Now, you and I think if we add up our ages, we're still not old enough to remember prohibition. Okay. Back in the early 1910s or whatever, after World War I, the government got together and said alcohol's bad. No alcohol.
That's a great example. Yeah, that's.
And now this was an amendment, so it's a little bigger, but
Yeah.
similar idea. And then we went, I think until 1933 it was that they said, nah, you know what, we want our booze back. Let's get everybody together and have another amendment to repeal the amendment that prohibited all of that.
Yeah.
So if we want to get rid of the PrEP Act, the way to do that is to pass another piece of legislation. Thank you, Representative Massie, for submitting it. And repeal this turd in the punch bowl, which is not the only problem. But my goodness, if we, the people, cannot get a tiny little bit of legislation removed and start the process of chipping away at the corruption that has been made legal, then we've lost control of our country. And so on May 3rd, I published repealtheprepact.com. I did it on May 3rd on purpose. If you go up to the top of the page, people will see what they're looking for.
Right.
I put that out on May 3rd of this year because that was 18 months prior to the election on November 3rd, 2026. So from this point forward, if there's anyone who is in Congress running for re-election, either the House or the Senate, if you don't see their name as a co-sponsor on the legislation, you got to ask yourself, are they bought and paid for by Big Pharma, or are they supporting the people? And so that's my story. I'm sticking to it. You know me, I always give my phone number. My phone number is everywhere on everything I do, 310-619-3055. You guys may have some questions now. We certainly have time to go over any questions, but I'm focused and dedicated to making this happen. I can see the day where people read the PrEP Act and have the same epiphany, the same aha, oh my God moment, where your first response is, this can't possibly be true. This can't possibly be in the Code of Federal Regulations. This can't possibly be law. But when you face the facts and you read it for yourself, you go, this is wrong. We need to make it right. We need to make this go away. And it's only a tiny little chunk. You eat an elephant one bite at a time. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of laws that also need to be repealed. But this is one that I think people can comprehend. They can understand it. It's relatively simple and straightforward. And if you're in support of it, have a nice day. I'm looking for allies. I'm looking for people who can see how horrible this thing really is. If you're in an industry where this law protects you from the harm that you cause to other people, well, you're going to have to discuss that with your maker when you go for your life judgment. It's not for me to judge. You can judge yourself. Do you think the PrEP Act is right and good and proper and holy and just? I don't think so. I think it's evil and it needs to go away.
Well, if we do operate by a transcendent, eternal law, morality in a transcendent sense doesn't change. It's wrong to murder. If you find someone who disagrees with that, well, turn around, run. But I wanted to ask you this point too. It also would preempt state laws. It says here that the PrEP Act explicitly prevents states or localities from imposing conflicting requirements on covered countermeasures during these declarations. So, and now that, so what if Florida passes their bill that opposes all this, and then so is that, am I thinking about that right? They could just override the state law?
There is certainly a question when you're dealing with a law. Let me restart that and start from the beginning and say something that some people might think is controversial. Okay. The founding fathers, I think, left out an important something. Okay. Congress can and has many times passed laws that are in violation of the authority given to them by the Constitution. They've exceeded their authority and they've passed laws that they never should have passed, giving themselves authority that we, the people, and the states that agreed to the Constitution never gave the federal government. In a perfect world, if I could go back in time and say every law passed by Congress should immediately first go to the Supreme Court to determine whether or not they've already violated the Constitution and exceeded their authority. If there was an immediate judicial review on every single law that was ever passed, I think that would have been an improvement in the Constitution. Maybe somebody can make that an amendment. But the Constitution as it stands allows Congress to make laws that violate our rights and overstep their authority. And the problem is it can hurt people for decades. And until someone has the wherewithal and the resources to say, hey, I've been harmed by this law. I think this law violates my constitutionally protected rights and oversteps the authority of the federal government. And they bring it to court, and then they raise the appeal, and then they raise the appeal, and then they get it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides, 1 out of 100 cases, oh yeah, we're going to listen to that case. And then the court could strike it down and go, no, you're right. That law is now gone from the books. That would have to happen in the scenario that you're raising, because at the moment, unless somebody challenges it and wins that challenge, the courts go, oh, well, the defendant filed a motion to dismiss and it says that they are a covered person under the PrEP Act. Sorry, case dismissed. Okay. The PrEP Act says state law does not apply. So if you're in state court, sorry, you're out of here. Okay. Now that's wrong, but that's how the court system, tends to work. There's a couple of court cases. There's a court case hanging in Florida. I actually attended the hearing with the judge over a motion to dismiss. Time flies. It had to be a month and a half ago. Still no decision on whether they're going to allow that course to continue. I believe there's also another court case in Louisiana, kind of sort of similar. Aaron Siri did that case. Yeah. So there's a couple of cases that are holding on the judge deciding, do I just dismiss this because of the PrEP Act, or do you have valid constitutional reasons to, take it all the way to the Supreme Court? Don't hold your breath for that. That ain't happening anytime soon. Not a whole heck of a lot people can do about a pending court case other than, talk about it. We, the people, have the responsibility to demand that our representatives in Congress sign on to the action that Thomas Massie has put forth and exhibit whether or not they support the PrEP Act by their name not being there. Their inaction, in my view, is guilt by association. If you're not co-sponsoring the bill to repeal the PrEP Act, that means you support the PrEP Act. And if you support the PrEP Act, I do not support you. I don't care who you are, what your party is, what your other ideas are. This is an easy one. Probably take 5 minutes for any congressperson to direct their staff, hey, I want to co-sponsor that piece of legislation, do the paperwork that needs to be done to put my name on the list. It's easy. If they can't do that, okay, we have a problem, America. Houston, we have a problem. If we, the people, cannot come together over the next 15 months or so before the next election and get a majority of the House and the Senate to sign on to repeal the PrEP Act and then hope that President Trump signs on to that, we've lost our country. This one's so easy and straightforward and obvious. How do you give a group of people the right to cause the deaths of other people and make it so that you can't even sue? It's wrong. It's clearly wrong. If you think it's right and good, we can have that discussion. I'll give you my phone number. It's 310-619-3055. If you think the PrEP Act is awesome, call me up. I'd love to hear you out. Okay. But if you think that this needs to go away, call me out and let's work together. Now, a lot of people may go, oh, he's got a petition, big whoop-de-doo. The purpose of the petition is to begin organizing allies on a district by district, state by state basis. The petition and everyone who has signed it is readily available on repealtheprepact.com for anyone to use. It's not about me submitting it to your congressperson. It's about you going through your district, getting allies to do that so that everybody listening to this can download the petition, see all of the people all around the country who have signed it. We've got several thousand signatures already. Last time I checked, I think I know I have signatures from people in every state. And I know I have signatures from at least 91% of the congressional districts in the United States. And so take this to your congressperson and say, look, we've got people around the country who understand this. They want this to be gone. And if you don't think you have enough signatures in your district, then go start spreading the word. So this isn't about, oh, we're going to petition the government. People need to understand that there is no official legal petition mechanism in the United States. Other countries have petition systems that if you get a certain threshold, then the government has to do something. If you actually, I hate to say it, but, do a Google search, do a DuckDuckGo search, ask ChatGPT or Google AI or whatever, how do you petition the government in the United States? You get up and yell at them. You call them, you email them, you write to them, you get other people to sign on to a petition and you deliver it to their door and you nag them until they cave to listen to you. Now, if you've got a lot of money, the way you petition your government is you make donations to their campaigns. That seems to work really, really well. If you're a corporation and you hire a special interest lobbyist, that's petitioning your government. Our representatives are listening to those types of petitions because we, the people, are not unified, organized, and loud enough to get our voices heard very clearly over the donors and the lobbyists. And so if you want to petition your government, call up your congressperson, call up your senator, set up an appointment, get informed. Don't go in there not knowing what you're talking about. The petition that I'm offering is that everyone in the country can sign on and everyone in the country can see who has signed on. And the bigger question is, who hasn't signed the petition? Whose name is not in that list because they haven't had the guts to say, yes, I want this to be taken off the books. Which congressperson has not co-sponsored this legislation? And at the moment, all 100 senators are guilty. None of them have sponsored companion legislation. Copy, paste, send. Hey, senators, have your staff read Congressperson Massie's bill and download it, turn it around, put your Senate name on it, and submit it to the Senate as a companion piece so it can go concurrently parallel through both the Senate and the House. What the heck are you waiting for? If you haven't done it, then guilt by association. You must be in bed with the pharmaceutical lobby. So I encourage everybody to, number one, get informed. Number two, if you have any questions, give me a call, ask whatever questions you may have. And number three, ask yourself, are you going to sit on your hands and do nothing? Or are you going to make a stink by spreading the word? Take this video, spread the daylights out of it, take repealtheprepact.com, spread it. If you're an ally in this venture, I'm going to be dedicated to this until victory, or until they have a new Congress and we got to start all over again. So until November 3rd, 2026.
Would you mind, early on, you mentioned the the violations of the Bill of Rights? You mentioned several
Well,
that
it
does violate.
oversteps. Yeah, I mean, there's a book that a PDF that you can download that you had been showing the top 8 things. It violates the Constitution by overreach of authority. Okay, Congress does not have the constitutional authority to tell the courts you can't say anything, because it takes away our rights to petition the government and bring it to court to say, hey, wait a minute, this is wrong. So it sets up the Secretary of Health and Human Services as a tyrant. And the Secretary of Health and Human Services is put at a conflict of interest in the sense where he's essentially saying, I recommend these products and I grant immunity from prosecution to anybody who does what I say. That's an overstepping of their constitutional authority. And then the First Amendment, it wiped out your right to a redress of grievances. You can't bring the secretary to court and say, hey, you can't do this. You don't have any evidence for it. Due process, again, there's no process by which you can have this be exposed openly in any kind of court. The Seventh Amendment is obvious. You have a right to a trial by jury if you're harmed. And the Ninth and 10th Amendment, wiping out state law and superseding it with this federal law. So at least 5 of the amendments are wiped out. Some people would argue the 14th Amendment for due process as well. It creates enormous conflicts of interest. People can read up all about that. I tried to put it as clear as I could into a one PDF document about the unconstitutionality of it. But just on a human level, there have been countless people who have been harmed, and they have gone to the point of bringing a court case, and they get to the point where the defendant files a motion to dismiss, and they go, hey, they can't sue us, we're covered. And I don't even know how to put words to that. It's the government is protecting a select group of people, allowing them to legally get away with causing harm. If y'all think that's good and right and just and holy and ordained by God, let's have a conversation. I don't get it. I think that's horrible.
I'll refute that notion right quick. Tell me what you think about this. It was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is what the founders
and an
believed.
exemption from one of the commandments. Okay, fine. Yeah,
sure, yeah. So, but that pursuit of happiness, we've been digging deep into what the founders meant by happiness, because that could be a very subjective term, but to them it wasn't subjective at all. What underlies that word happiness in all of the writings in the Federalist Papers and others is they clearly viewed happiness as virtue. So life, liberty, and virtue. And so this seems to be something this is what you're pointing out here, is that's something that's been lost. We are, virtue is in high demand at this point. And it seems like that we can see that clearly in, bills, laws like this. And I think it's worth reminding people that, if you love liberty and you hate tyranny, we need more virtuous men and women in these positions.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the Gettysburg Address where Lincoln said that we, have to stand behind a country that was of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations.
I believe that's what it was.
That's what that was. That's what he meant, right? When he said, people. Okay.
Or that was the Marxist reinterpretation. Yeah.
Or fascist. Yeah, and so
probably fascist, more like it. Yeah.
This is not something that's going to happen overnight. I'm in it for the long haul. Anybody who sees that one of the roots of the problem during COVID was that doctors and hospitals did things, that they were incentivized with money That's a different piece of legislation. So that's a different argument. But they knew that they had legal protection from any kind of lawsuit. Just put yourself in that position in your own business or whatever it is you do. If you could make all the mistakes in the world and nobody could hold you to account, how would that change how you act? You become a little bit more sloppy, and you become a little bit more, lackadaisical about safety. And unfortunately, in our world, corporations are held to account for when they cause harm. People sue them for money. Now, that's not ideal, but that's the system that keeps them in check. And the PrEP Act took that away. And so what does safe and effective mean when there is no financial incentive whatsoever for companies to make their products be either of those things? And we can see the results. It's very, very obvious.
James, it is. All right. We're at a good point here, and we'll just we'll let you go, James, and then we'll sign off right behind you to keep this video.
I'm sure we'll be talking again. Again, people just go to repealtheprepact.com. Take the time to watch the video. I put out a little newsletter, read everything, get informed. If you have any questions, give me a call at 310-619-3055. This isn't going to happen overnight. Sign the petition, go to repealtheprepact.org. But the petition is not about, I'll put our name on a piece of paper and the world is going to suddenly change. This is to help everyone organize. And I'll raise a question for people to think about. Do you even know the geographical boundaries of your congressional district? Do you know who your congressperson is? I have found, even though I provide evidence, not evidence, but a means by which people can identify their congressperson, about 10% of the people who've signed the petition have no idea who their congressperson is, right? So step number one is really fundamental basics. Know who your congressperson is, know the area in which you can appeal to people who are constituents of that congressperson, get organized in your locale and in your state, and focus in on talking to the person who is supposed to listen to you as a constituent, represent your wishes, and nag them mercilessly until they do what you and many other people in your community want them to do. That's our system. Like it or not, that's what the founding fathers gave us. We have the responsibility to do our part, which is to let our representatives know what it is we want them to do and hold them to account every election day when they fail to do it. So that's the job ahead. We have time, but we don't have time. It's not like it's going to, happen tomorrow. But there's no time like the present to get working on it. So,
and folks, before we run away here, James has also given you all you have to do. There it is.
If you've ever seen a lost dog or a lost cat or somebody trying to sell their stuff, I've got the simplest thing you could do is print that out and stick it on a telephone pole somewhere, and cut a little slip there so people can do a tear off and go. Got trifold flyers, brochures, everything under the sun, and I'm open to ideas for anything anybody wants to do. This is not a Republican and a Democrat thing, because I've got Republicans on record. I don't know if you can scroll down a little bit until you see the. I'm happy to make Abraxas is in Delaware. Let's make murder a crime again. I'm happy to work with people to, if they've got creative ideas, to make whatever it is they want. Now is the time to show your creativity, show your compassion for other people. Let's repeal the PrEP Act and make the world a better place.
Amen to that. Summer, anything from you?
Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing this to our attention, and we'll definitely follow up with you. And thank you so much for your time today, James.
And thank you for your hard work. This is you're a great help to all of us.
I'll see y'all soon. Take care.
All right. Bye.